It's very exciting to be here. See lots of people interested in visualization and mapping. What I'm going to touch on today is taking a look at the US high-tech zones and exploring them. And then what's the background coming, what actually drove us to identify the high-tech clusters in the United States and analyze them was starting from shift to knowledge economy, basically growth of suburban industrial districts and industrial parks, getting to 80s, the time that we were changing the basically dominant industries that they were running the economy. They were changing mostly to IT, high-tech, biopharmaceutical, and those type of industries, and then going to the time that Silicon Valley was growing as well. So I'm trying to be fast. Going through this timeline, we started from a very manufacturing-based economy, going towards a very knowledge-based economy. In all of these cases, we saw that when we were taking a look at the place and urban environment, they were always involved in the economic development, economic outcome. And they were always being affected, and also they were basically driving the economic outcome as well. So I was trying to show a kind of like shifting from manufacturing economy-oriented place to knowledge-based economy, basically place. And coming to now that there is a basically big focus on different urban development strategies, that they all want to grow the knowledge-based economy, they want to attract the high-tech firms, and they see that there is economic growth through harnessing and attracting these type of firms. It's innovation district, which is very familiar and popular, is going on. Knowledge-based urban development, they are mostly famous in European countries. Knowledge clusters, creative clusters, they are all pretty much dominant discourses in terms of urban development to harness the economic growth. Most of them, they are focusing on transit accessible, compact area, walkable area. But what is basically the discourse behind the innovation district is that to have a geographical territory to bring the economic, networking, and physical components together. Economic components are basically now is universities, high-tech firm, high-tech industries. Networking assets are the opportunities that where we meet and we exchange knowledge, something like what's happening right now here. And the physical assets are transit accessibility, walkability, compactness. They are being taught as the major factors in terms of growth if you want to attract the high-tech firms. We see that this type of development is being implemented in different regions in the United States, starting from San Francisco, going to, I think this one is San Luis, Boston, which was basically pretty much before most of the innovation district, and then even going to South America, we see that this type of development is very popular. Okay, so when it's important for urban planners and policymakers to focus on the high-tech economic development and to develop this type of supportive urban development for high-tech economy, what is pretty much important is that to first identify where are the high-tech clusters. Where do we see that the industrial districts with the strong presence of high-tech economy, because then they're going to impact the development, also the decision-making about developing innovation districts, they're going to be impacted by the location of high-tech clusters. When they are pretty much important in policy making, so there is a gap. So in most of the regions in the United States, there are kind of local knowledge about where the high-tech clusters are, but there is not yet a data-driven analysis of their location in order to help them. In one of the cases, I was working in North Texas in putting together a plan for medical innovation district development, and we were working with two agencies in one region that both of them, they wanted to develop the same type of innovation district. They all wanted to attract biopharmaceutical companies, but when we identified the high-tech cluster, we figured out that those biopharmaceutical clusters are in none of those locations. So those clusters are somewhere else. So that came to our kind of like thought that we need to know where are those high-tech clusters, because these are at this moment of a time important for policymaking. So the research in order to get to the high-tech clusters has two components. The first component is identifying the territory of high-tech clusters, and the second phase is identifying their sectoral typology. Very brief, information technology, aerospace devices, biopharmaceutical, professional services, communication, and R&D. They were the sectors that we included because of their very high level of R&D activity. I want to go through our method pretty fast. I don't want to focus on it. We divided the regions in the United States, their urbanized areas to small hexagons. Each of them was 0.3 square mile big, and then we came up with the principal component analysis of employment and firm number. Whoever is going to join me in the workshop, we're going to work on this, developing index and visualizing index on the map. So we wanted to combine number of firms in the high-tech economy and number of employees in the high-tech economy, and coming up with only one value that represents both of them, and then going through the hotspot analysis and identify where are the hotspots of high-tech firms and high-tech employee. So you see the results before converting the hexagon-based territories to real territories, going through Chicago. I think this case is Boston, New York, San Francisco, Northern California, North Texas. So we needed to run this analysis region by region, identifying the hottest spots region by region, because if we wanted to, it was not correct to run the entire analysis for the entire country, although it was tougher to run it for each region because we needed to repeat it. The next section was identifying their sector, that we calculated their market concentration index, both again in terms of index, in terms of employment number and firm number. We divided first all of the high-tech cluster to those ones that they have one industry dominant in them, from those ones that they have multiple industry dominant in them. So when we get the mono high-techs or those high-tech clusters that they have only one industry dominant in them, then we could use the location coefficient to identify their sectoral typology. So this is basically look at the national trend. Almost over 50% of high-tech clusters in the United States, they have multiple high-tech industry dominant in them, or basically we can say that they are diverse. After that, we have professional services that they are dominating the high-tech clusters. Professional services are including architecture firms, landscape architecture firms, or engineering, those type of providing services for construction or for other companies to work in. Biopharmaceutical services, they have, although which is pretty much in the attention of majority of efforts for developing innovation district, has the lowest number of high-tech clusters in the United States. And that has some, when we were looking into it, that had some reason behind it, because most of the startup activity in biopharmaceutical, that needs more support, because biopharmaceutical activity in the United States, they are mostly dominated by big firms and big companies. Then this diagram is trying to show the distribution of high-tech clusters, their number and by their sectors across the region, the large regions that we have. You see the Los Angeles metro area has the highest number of high-tech clusters, going down to Oakland City, Oklahoma, that has the lowest number of high-tech clusters. While we don't have that many biopharmaceutical high-tech clusters, that was and R&D clusters, that was letting us to the next step to identify the case studies. Where are the regions that we see more of the biopharmaceutical clusters? Where are the regions that we see more of the R&D high-tech clusters? Like Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Nashville regions, they were the regions that they had the highest number of R&D clusters. And Salt Lake City, Sacramento, Washington, D.C., particularly Washington, D.C. was the one that had the highest number of biotech clusters. But in addition to that point, if we go back to my introduction, we talked about that innovation district, those type of urban development that they want to attract high-tech firms, they're all talking about work plus live plus play. But is that what's going on in the high-tech clusters? What we found that although there is a very high conversation about it, in all of the regions that we analyzed, in the high-tech clusters on average, there are only 7% of population living within them. Although more than 50% of high-tech employee, high-tech establishments, and high-tech large establishments, and high-tech headquarters, they are in high-tech clusters. So there is a big job population imbalance, even in the high-tech economy, where the focus is on work, live, place. In this situation, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago are among the regions that they have the highest the largest number of residents living in the high-tech clusters. Looking again across the different sectors, the first graph is showing the average employment number and average population and average employment number. You see that there is a big gap between the employment number and population across most of the sectors. Although also we looked at the average percent of a university educated population that they are living in the high-tech clusters, and also the racial diversity within the high-tech clusters. And we see that mostly biopharmaceutical clusters are those ones that they have the higher number of educated population living in them, meaning that the biotech clusters, they are closer to work, live, play situation. And professional services and multi-services clusters, they have the highest average rate of racial diversity. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Los Angeles metropolitan area, it's basically use of map visualization to show the sectoral disparities between the high-tech clusters. The brown one are showing high-tech clusters with multiple industry dominant in it. As you see, we have, in majority of the cases, we have high-tech clusters close to airports. Here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we see, again, downtowns, they are also home to high-tech clusters. But the next step of ongoing research is we are taking out the CBD and downtown high-tech clusters, and we are looking at their dominant high-tech industry. Looking at the Northern California, we see that although Northern California regions, they are very famous in high-tech economy, you see most of their high-tech economy, they're concentrated in few high-tech clusters. Again, basically increasing the issues and negative consequences of job population imbalance. Looking at, I think this one is Washington, one of the cases that we had most of the biopharmaceutical clusters in it. And again, we see that CBD, downtowns, airports, and also freeway system, they have some basically a spatial pattern correlation with the high-tech clusters location. This one is the case of Boston. The majority of their high-tech clusters, they are multi-high-tech industries. And on average, across the multi-high-tech clusters, but professional services and IT, they had the highest basically number of employment. So although there are multi-high-tech clusters, but basically IT and professional services is stronger, because what we were getting to was that why biopharmaceutical industries, they have very few clusters. We wanted to see whether we are missing some of them in the multi-high-tech cluster, and that was not the case. And this is North Texas that we were working. As you see, biopharmaceutical cluster is here. One development is going on here by Medical Innovation District, and one is going on here. Although the biopharmaceutical clusters, they are basically they should be mixed. They are here mixed with R&D. So the next one is our own region, Chicago region. You see that one of the differences that we found between Chicago region and the rest of the region was that we see high-tech clusters forming next to the transit line. And this is a good point about Chicago, that although we were seeing in other regions that freeway system was basically had the spatial correlation pattern with the high-tech clusters. I have to move on pretty fast. Yes. So you see up here, well, I'm new to Chicago. I'm just here for 4 months, but I'm exploring all of this location to learn. So by pharmaceutical cluster is in north. I'm looking into different clusters here to see what's going on. What are the basically anchors of those high-tech clusters? You see professional services. They have the highest number of professional services. They have the highest number of clusters in Chicago region. Although when we were looking at other regions, on average, they had more of the diverse multi-high-tech clusters. That's another point that shows Chicago is relying on the professional services. And you see Central Business District, Oak Park, they are the places that you see high-tech clusters are showing up across the transit station. And again, when we compare Chicago region with the nation, on average, we have almost 2 times more population living in the high-tech clusters. So Chicago is one of those opportunities that maybe nation can take a look in terms of being closer, in terms of the components of working and living and playing in the same place. I'm not sure about playing, but I know that working and living now is pretty close. The diagram that you see on your right is taking a look at the distance from CBD and then changes in population. You see when we get close, when we get further from CBD, we are losing population. So the first diagram is showing population. The other one is showing the share of university-educated residents. And the reason that I'm putting share of educated resident, it's not to just focus on them. I want to see which cluster they're closer to work, play, live. Because basically their employees should be university-educated people that they see that I just want to identify those geographical locations. So when we look at them, we see again that R&D cluster up north here has the highest number of share of educated residents. But getting further from CBD and going towards suburbs, they are losing their population, although they're not losing their employment that much. We ran the analysis nationwide, and it was showing that getting further from CBDs and downtowns, we were losing population pretty fast, but number of employment, it was not changing. We released the result of this analysis using Esri product. We are working on it to finalize it, to get the publication out of it, but you can do, this will be available on the UDVL website. On the first page, and you can go, I know all of you are from Chicago, you can take a look if you're close to any high-tech cluster. If anybody is from other region, they can take a look to explore their regions as well. But now that I identify high-tech cluster, there are a couple of points about high-tech clusters that we saw in terms of their spatial structure, that regions are pretty much diverse. Some of them, like Northern California, New York, they have their high-tech economy concentrated in few clusters, running the risk of segregation, suburban poverty, that needs the specific attention. On the other hand, we have some regions like LA that they have pretty much dispersed high-tech clusters. They run, if they don't rely on the transit system, they're going to run the risk of traffic and congestion. The other point that was pretty important was that when we talk about transit accessibility, walkability, those type of characteristics of urban development, they are more beneficial to those type of services that they're relying on more of knowledge exchange and less manufacturing activity. That would be more of professional services. My suspicion was that maybe majority of knowledge economy and high-tech firms in the United States are actually professional services, and that's why that's dominating that narrative. And that was right. 67% of high-tech firms in the United States, high-tech employees in the United States, they are employed in professional services. And seeing high-tech clusters close to airport is talking about what has been in the literature, that proximity to airport is going to increase the chance of having the employment sub-centers. Going pretty fast through, because we saw high-tech clusters with different characteristics, different potential negative externalities. Another part of project is getting to the policy solutions for different negative externalities. If we are seeing shrinking middle class or polarized labor division, particularly in the areas that they have their high-tech economy, clusters in fewer zone, inclusive leadership coalition, that is already being implemented in a couple of the regions by having the NGOs and grassroots leaders active in the coalition and leadership of innovation districts and development to make sure that people from different class, they can get to that level and receive the educational resources. Supporting diverse zones, because different sectors, they have different locational behavior that helps us to get closer not only to one specific infrastructure. Housing unaffordability, displacement, gentrification was one of the issues that was very dominant in the literature of innovation district. Getting the high-tech firms, giving them incentive. On the other hand, get them involved in educational package for the current local employees and local labor, basically get them involved in the local labor empowerment plans to help them to be able to get to this type of job market. The spatial polarization was another point that I discussed, could be as the result and consequence of having high-tech economy concentrated in fewer zones, and unmanageable growth, income competition, lower trust. I'm gonna go pretty fast to the questions because there were many points. So if I wanted to go through it, it would be 1 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to go to